The gray stone mansion that stood imposingly on top of the hill seemed even more ominous under the cloudy sky that afternoon. The news of Alfredo Montenegro's death, the billionaire magnate, had spread like wildfire throughout the city, and now all eyes were on his vast estate. Known for his difficult temperament and for amassing one of the largest fortunes in the country, Montenegro had always been an enigmatic figure, surrounded by mysteries and intrigues. The reading of the will, scheduled for the next day, was eagerly awaited by the few family members who still tolerated him. His death had been sudden, but not entirely unexpected. The old Montenegro's health had been deteriorating for months, and many believed the will would be a mere formality, distributing his vast fortune among the few direct heirs. However, on the morning of the scheduled day, an even greater mystery emerged. A new document, handwritten and sealed with the family crest, was found in his office. The family lawyer, Dr. Augusto Braga, with his perpetually serious expression, entered the mansion's living room with the will in hand, while the family members, children, grandchildren, and some distant relatives, waited in silence. The atmosphere was heavy, with an almost palpable air of tension. "This is Alfredo Montenegro's last wish," announced Dr. Braga, opening the document with trembling hands. What followed left everyone in the room stunned. The instructions contained in the will were nothing short of bizarre. Alfredo Montenegro had left unexpected inheritances to people outside the family circle, including former employees and even complete strangers. But what really shocked everyone were the conditions imposed on the direct heirs. Each of them had to fulfill specific tasks, ranging from simple to absurdly complex, in order to receive their share of the inheritance. The tasks were accompanied by enigmatic messages, almost as if the old Montenegro were still playing with everyone's fates, even after his death. As the days passed and the heirs began to try to decipher and fulfill the conditions of the will, the Montenegro family's secrets started to emerge. What had once been mere whispers in the shadows now turned into disturbing revelations. And then, amid this chaos, a murder occurred, further shaking the already fragile family unity. Suspicion spread quickly, and it soon became clear that anyone in the mansion could be the killer. The atmosphere of distrust and fear grew each day. Who would be the next to fall? And most importantly, who was behind the murder? Was this a scheme planned from the beginning by Montenegro himself, or had someone within the family decided to take drastic measures to secure their share of the inheritance? With each revelation, the tension increased, and the true purpose of the will began to unfold. But the answer to the darkest mystery was yet to come, and it promised to destroy everything and everyone in its path. Night had fallen over the Montenegro mansion, and a deathly silence had taken hold of the place. The stone walls, which had witnessed countless gala dinners and luxurious parties, now seemed to bear the weight of the secrets that were beginning to surface. In the office where Alfredo Montenegro had spent much of his life, the reading of the will had left deep marks on everyone present. The air was thick, heavy with tension and suspicion. Caterina, Alfredo's eldest daughter, sat in the leather armchair that had once belonged to her father. Her long fingers drummed nervously on the arm of the chair as her eyes stared into the void. She had always been her father's favorite, and for that reason, she expected to be the main beneficiary of the fortune. But the conditions imposed in the will had left her perplexed. Alfredo had demanded that she recover an emerald necklace, a family heirloom that had been missing for over 20 years, in order to receive her share of the inheritance. To Caterina, this seemed like an impossible task, a cruel whim of a man who never stopped manipulating her, even after death. On the other side of the room, Enrique, the middle son, leafed through the documents his father had left for him. Enrique had always had a turbulent relationship with Alfredo, marked by resentments and misunderstandings. His father demanded that he take back control of the family business, which Enrique had abandoned years earlier to pursue his passion for the arts. But there was a disturbing detail. Alfredo included a clause stipulating that Enrique should immediately fire any employee who had been with the company for more than 15 years, many of whom were loyal to Enrique himself. The cruelty of the task was evident, and the growing doubt in his mind was Alfredo trying to punish him for his departure? As the siblings digested their respective conditions, a figure emerged from the shadows. Leonardo, Montenegro's favorite grandson, watched everything in silence. Unlike the others, his task seemed, at first glance, simpler. He was to spend an entire night in the old family country house, a place abandoned and shrouded in legend. But Leonardo knew that the task carried something deeper. The country house was a place where dark events had occurred in the past, events that were never fully explained. The young man had always been fascinated by the mysteries surrounding the place, but now, the thought of spending a night there filled him with an inexplicable dread. The hours dragged on, and the night grew colder. In the depths of the mansion, the sound of footsteps echoed through the empty corridors. Each heir, now alone with their thoughts, wondered about the true purpose of the will. But the mansion held secrets that had yet to be revealed. As Caterina, Enrique, and Leonardo prepared to face their respective tasks, something more sinister was set in motion. In the early hours of the morning, a scream pierced the silence of the mansion. The heirs hurriedly made their way to the source of the sound, only to find one of the household staff, the old gardener, lying lifeless in the garden. His body was partially hidden in the shadows, and in his trembling hand, he held an ancient key, rusted with age. That key seemed to have been ripped from somewhere, and his fingers still gripped it tightly, as if it were the only thing that could protect him. Panic quickly set in. Who could have done this? And why? Questions multiplied, and what had once seemed like a series of bizarre tasks now began to reveal itself as part of a much more dangerous game. With the gardener's body still fresh in the garden, the Montenegro mansion became a true battleground, where secrets buried for decades began to emerge. Each heir was now on high alert, aware that the key to Montenegro's fortune might be closer than they had imagined, but also that danger lurked in the shadows, and any wrong move could be fatal. The tension in the Montenegro mansion had reached a critical point, and the next moves by each heir would be decisive. Doubt, fear, and mistrust hung over everyone like a dark cloud that refused to dissipate. And as the heirs turned their eyes on one another, a single question echoed in their minds: who would be the next to fall? The discovery of the gardener's body turned the Montenegro mansion into a place of paranoia and terror. What had once been merely a macabre game imposed by Alfredo's will now took on dark and dangerous dimensions. The air was thick, almost suffocating, and the mansion's corridors, once majestic, now seemed narrow and labyrinthine, as if they wanted to trap anyone who dared to traverse them. The next morning, Dr. Augusto Braga, still shaken by the gardener's death, called a meeting in the library. All the heirs were present, their expressions a mix of fear and suspicion. The lawyer, usually calm and confident, now seemed uneasy. He was duty-bound to ensure that the will's conditions were met, but the recent tragedy had cast a shadow over everything. "It's clear that something very wrong is happening here," he began, his voice trembling. "The gardener's death cannot be a coincidence. And this key," he held up the rusted object that had been found in the deceased's hand. "This key may be a piece of a puzzle that Alfredo left for you to solve." Caterina stared intently at the key, trying to recall any clue or memory that could connect the object to something important. Her thoughts, however, were constantly interrupted by the growing sense that they were all being watched. She couldn't shake the idea that perhaps Alfredo himself was still, in some way, manipulating them from beyond the grave. Enrique, on the other hand, was focused on something else. His father's will seemed increasingly like a carefully planned trap. He wondered whether the gardener's murder was part of a larger scheme or if someone in the family had taken drastic measures to secure their share of the inheritance. His cold, calculating gaze shifted to Leonardo, who sat apart from the others, his face pale and his eyes fixed on the floor. Leonardo felt a chill down his spine. The country house, the task he had been given. Everything seemed connected somehow. The key, the dead gardener, the conditions of the will. He had always known that house held secrets, but now, with death looming over them, the thought of spending the night there terrified him. But he knew he had no choice. If he wanted to uncover the truth, he had to see it through. "We have to move forward with the conditions of the will," Leonardo finally said, raising his head and looking at the others. "Each of us has a task to complete, and I believe it's connected to what's happening. We need to find out what this key unlocks." The decision was made. That very night, Leonardo would head to the country house, taking the key with him. Caterina, though hesitant, offered to accompany him. She didn't trust anyone, but she also didn't want to leave her cousin to face it alone. Enrique, for his part, decided to stay at the mansion, reviewing the documents and trying to understand the logic behind the clauses imposed by his father. As the sun set, Leonardo and Caterina set off toward the country house. The dirt road leading to the place was narrow and winding, flanked by tall trees that seemed to bend over the path, as if trying to conceal the secret that awaited in the darkness. The tension between them was palpable, but neither dared to speak of the fear they felt. They knew they were heading toward something much greater than either of them could imagine. Upon arriving at the old country house, the place was exactly as Leonardo remembered it, abandoned, with broken windows and peeling paint. The wind whistled through the cracks in the walls, creating an eerie sound that seemed to come from all directions. Holding the key tightly, Leonardo approached the main door, with Caterina closely behind, her heart pounding in her chest. The key slid easily into the rusted lock, and with a loud click, the door creaked open. The smell of mold and rotting wood hit them immediately, but it was the unknown waiting inside that made them most apprehensive. The darkness inside the house was thick, almost tangible, and shadows danced in the flickering light of the lantern Leonardo carried. Each step they took made the floorboards groan, as if the house was warning them to turn back. But they knew they couldn't retreat now. Shining the lantern around, Leonardo illuminated the corners of the main room, revealing dusty furniture and cobwebs swaying gently in the breeze coming through the broken windows. In the center of the room was a large wooden chest, ornately decorated with intricate designs and symbols that Leonardo couldn't decipher immediately. The chest seemed to be the source of it all. He knelt down, bringing the key closer to the rusted lock. His fingers trembled slightly as he turned the key, hearing the mechanism unlock with a muffled click. The chest opened with a creak, revealing its contents. Inside were a series of old documents, yellowed with age, and a small metal box, sealed with red wax. Leonardo and Caterina exchanged a significant glance. This was more than they expected to find. But before they could open the box, a sound from upstairs made them freeze. Footsteps, light but unmistakable, echoed down the hallway above them. Someone or something was in the house with them. Caterina clutched Leonardo's arm, panic creeping into her voice. "We're not alone here," she whispered, her eyes wide with fear. And then, suddenly, the lantern flickered, and darkness swallowed them whole. The tension peaked. Leonardo and Caterina were now trapped in the old house, with ancient secrets in their hands and an unknown presence around them. The key had opened more than just a chest, it had unleashed something that had been hidden for a long time, and now they would face the consequences. What would they find upstairs? Would they be ready to face the truth, or would the secret that Alfredo Montenegro guarded so well lead them to ruin? The darkness engulfed Leonardo and Caterina like a shroud, heightening the terror that already hung over them. The lantern flickered, casting weak beams of light that only deepened the shadows around them. The footsteps upstairs abruptly ceased, plunging the house into an eerie silence. For a brief moment, neither of them dared to move or even breathe. "We need to get out of here," Caterina murmured, gripping Leonardo's arm tighter. Her voice was a desperate whisper, thick with fear. Leonardo, however, was torn. Something inside him urged him to continue, to uncover what was happening in this house. He knew that the secret his grandfather had left for them was on the verge of being revealed. "Not yet," he replied, trying to sound firm, though his heart was racing. "We need to find out what this is." Before Caterina could protest, a new sound cut through the air, coming from upstairs. It was a creaking, slow and deliberate, like someone opening a door or moving something heavy. Leonardo swallowed hard and, with a gesture for Caterina to follow, began to climb the stairs. Each step seemed to sink under the weight of their decisions, emitting a sinister creak with every move. The stairs led to a long hallway, where old, dusty doors lined up like sentinels of long-forgotten secrets. Leonardo's lantern continued to flicker, casting brief flashes of light on the mold-covered walls and nebulous figures that seemed to form in the shadows. The air was cold, and a growing sense of unease filled both of them as they approached the end of the corridor. The last door, slightly ajar, seemed to throb in the darkness as if beckoning them inside. That was where the sound had come from. Leonardo paused in front of it, trying to muster the courage. Katerina, still clutching his arm, was on the verge of pleading to turn back, but the determined look in Leonardo's eyes stopped her. He pushed the door, which opened with a frightful groan, revealing a room shrouded in gloom. In the center of the room, a rocking chair swayed slowly back and forth, creaking with each movement. No one was sitting in it, but it was evident that someone had been there not long ago. In the opposite corner, a cold fireplace emitted a faint smell of old ashes, and on the wall, a mirror covered by a white sheet seemed to hide something that no one wanted to see. Leonardo took a step forward, fixing his gaze on the rocking chair. The light from the lantern partially illuminated the floor, revealing a trail of dust that ended at the foot of the chair. He crouched down, and when he touched the floor, he realized there were fresh marks in the dust, as if someone had stood up from there just minutes before. A chill ran down his spine. "Leonardo, please," Katerina whispered, her voice barely audible. But before she could finish her sentence, something caught both of their attention, a faint glow emanating from beneath the door of a wardrobe in the corner of the room. Leonardo hesitated for a moment, but curiosity was stronger. He slowly approached the wardrobe, feeling Katerina's presence behind him, as nervous as he was. Holding the flashlight firmly in one hand, he grasped the wardrobe's doorknob with the other. As he opened the door, the light intensified, revealing a small wooden box, similar to the one they had found in the chest downstairs. Inside the box was a single object, a golden key, polished and showing no signs of rust, as if it had been recently stored there. Leonardo picked it up, feeling its surprising weight. The key seemed to pulse in his hand, radiating a strange energy. He had no idea what it unlocked, but he knew it was important. Meanwhile, Katerina turned to the covered mirror. Something drew her to that spot, an inexplicable feeling that the true secret was hidden there. With a deep breath, she extended her hand and pulled away the sheet covering the mirror. What she saw made her recoil with a stifled scream. It wasn't their reflection the mirror was showing, but the image of a different room, a room she immediately recognized, Alfredo Montenegro's office in the mansion. The mirror, somehow, was connected to the main house, and in it, the figure of a person was visible, sitting in her grandfather's leather chair. The figure slowly turned, as if it could see through the mirror, and then Enrique's face appeared. He looked lost in thought, leafing through the documents he had left behind, oblivious to the fact that he was being watched. But what was most disturbing was the reflection of another person behind Enrique, an indistinct shadow slowly moving toward him. Leonardo and Katerina exchanged a terrified look. They needed to warn Enrique, but before they could move, the figure in the mirror disappeared, and the glass shattered before them, scattering shards across the floor. Leonardo's flashlight flickered one last time before going out completely, leaving them immersed in darkness. Now, more than ever, they knew the danger was closer than they had imagined. The golden key Leonardo held trembled slightly in his hand, as if eager to be used. Something awaited them at the Montenegro mansion, something that could change everything, or destroy them forever. The darkness in the country house seemed to swallow Leonardo and Katerina completely. The shards of broken glass reflected the little light that remained, like tiny eyes watching their every move. The mirror, now broken, had revealed much more than either of them had expected, and the weight of that discovery hung over them like a silent threat. Leonardo still held the golden key, now almost burning in his hand, as if it carried its own, pulsating, living energy. He knew that key was the final piece of a macabre puzzle his grandfather had left for them. But what would it unlock? And, more importantly, what would they find when they used it? Without a word, they both raced down the stairs, as if pursued by an invisible presence. The country house, which had once seemed like just an abandoned and forgotten place, was now revealing itself as a gateway to something much darker. When they reached the car, the engine took a long time to start, as if the machine itself was reluctant to let them escape. But when it finally roared to life, they drove away, leaving behind the echo of buried secrets. The journey back to the Montenegro mansion was marked by a heavy silence. Katerina's mind was in turmoil, trying to process everything she had seen. Enrique was in danger, and that indistinct shadow in the mirror was a threat they could not ignore. But how to warn him without sounding insane? How to explain something they themselves didn't fully understand? When they finally arrived at the mansion, the atmosphere was different. The lights were all on, but the house seemed shrouded in an unnatural stillness. The wind howled outside, banging against the windows as if trying to get in. Leonardo and Katerina ran to the office, where they had seen Enrique in the mirror. Upon entering, the shock paralyzed them. The office was empty, but the documents Enrique had been leafing through were scattered across the floor, as if he had left in a hurry. On the desk, a still warm cup of coffee emitted a faint steam, indicating he had been there recently. Katerina approached the papers, trying to find a clue. But it was Leonardo who discovered something. In the corner of the desk, almost hidden, was another key, identical to the one he held, except for an inscription engraved on the metal, "For what remains." "What does that mean?" Katerina whispered, more to herself than to Leonardo. Before he could answer, a low, continuous sound began echoing through the mansion, a sound that seemed to come from all sides. It was the sound of something dragging, a slow and deliberate movement. They looked at each other, terror growing in their eyes. The sound was approaching, echoing through the empty corridors. Leonardo gripped the golden key, feeling that the final moment was about to arrive. Without hesitation, he ran toward the old safe hidden behind a painting in the office, something his grandfather always kept very carefully. With a decisive movement, he inserted the key into the lock. The safe, which had never been opened by any of the heirs, turned with a dry click. Inside was just a single envelope. Leonardo took it, his hands trembling slightly. When he opened it, he found a handwritten letter in a familiar handwriting. Alfredo Montenegro's words were clear and cold. "To what remains of my family, know that the true test is not what I leave, but what I hide. The Montenegro legacy is a curse disguised as fortune. What you will find is only the beginning. What will remain of you when everything is revealed?" The sound of something dragging increased, now almost within their ears' reach. They knew they were being surrounded, but by whom or what was still a mystery they would never fully understand. Katerina looked at Leonardo, terror etched on her face. "What do we do now?" Leonardo didn't answer. He knew that the answer was far beyond anything they could do. Holding the letter in his hand, he felt the weight of his grandfather's words and the terrible realization that they would never truly be safe. The Montenegro mansion, with all its secrets and shadows, had enveloped them in a web from which they might never escape. And as the sinister sound approached, only one certainty remained: this was only the beginning of a cursed legacy, and they had just opened the door to something that should never have been awakened.